9 people on the Supreme Court will decide the future of Obamacare. What should we be watching for? This is the Citizen Link Report. I'm Stuart Shepard along with Bruce Hausknecht, our judicial analyst. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Stuart.
We're in the middle of 3 unusual days of hearings at the Supreme Court as they talk about the president's signature legislation, as he's been talking about it, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. In general, as you look over how it's gone so far, what do you think? What are you seeing?
Well, first of all, it doesn't appear to me that in yesterday's argument, which was about the Anti-Injunction Act, that the justices were inclined to throw this lawsuit out. Essentially, the Anti-Injunction Act is a barrier to filing this lawsuit against any kind of tax that is assessed before it's paid.
Right.
Obamacare has a mandate in it. It says you will either buy insurance or you will pay this penalty. And the question in yesterday's argument was, well, is it a tax or is it a penalty? If it's a tax, then the suit can't go anywhere because no one's paid it yet. But if it's a penalty, then we can skip ahead to talking about the constitutionality of the mandate itself.
And the justices didn't seem open to that argument at all. In fact, the government, which brought it up, had even dropped it before they ever got to the Supreme Court.
That's correct. In fact, it's fairly unusual, but the Supreme Court actually hired its own attorney to come in and argue the part of the case that the government had abandoned, that this was in fact a tax and that this whole lawsuit was precluded because it was a tax.
Now, that tells us a little bit about the John Roberts Court, about the Chief Justice and how he wants everything to be done perfectly as we go through this, so there's no question.
He is probably one of the most methodical justices we've ever had. You can always be assured that no I will be left undotted or T uncrossed.
Now, we've been listening to the audio from this, and frankly, it's hard to follow. It's like stepping into the middle of a doctoral class, a doctoral level class on legal stuff. But in the midst of that, it's interesting because there are parts that the rest of us can pick up. We've noticed, because Bruce in particular reads opinions all the time. Often judges will write the opinions, some of it for the legal folks, but also there'll be sections for the rest of us to help us figure out what they're talking about. But when they're having a hearing at the Supreme Court, it is all very high level and very hard to follow. But knowing that, in the midst of it, even the government attorney, the Solicitor General, was having a tough time keeping straight on the whole penalty tax thing, because the government found itself in the legally awkward position, on one hand arguing that it's a penalty, on the other hand arguing that it's a tax, depending on which one suited their argument the best for that day. Take a listen to how it went down.
If they've paid the tax, then they're in compliance with the law.
Why do you keep saying tax?
If they pay the tax penalty, they're in compliance with the law.
So, Bruce, when you hear that, what do you hear?
Well, to the lawyer involved, yes, it sounds as if the government is arguing both things, and they essentially are. One day they're arguing, no, this is a penalty, and the next day they're arguing, this is a tax. It's because they're arguing under 2 different clauses. One is an IRS code and one is the Constitution. And so they're saying it's different when you consider each issue. But to the regular layman's ear, of course, it sounds as if the government is arguing both sides of this case.
And it's important to know, too, that the Supreme Court justices have read reams of paperwork leading up to this. They know the argument as well or better than the people who are showing up in front of them to present their arguments. And they talk about it in that way, that they deal with it in a way that we already know where you're going with this and cut each other off and move on. As they get talking about important things, though, like the individual mandate, which has to do with forcing each human being who's alive in the United States to buy health care, as they talk about things such as this requirement that health care cover abortion, that's where it really comes to the issues that we care about and the arguments that we know really well.
Well, this is all about a massive intrusion of the federal government into the private sphere. If this law is upheld, and the government can order everybody in the country to buy health insurance, there's nothing they can't do. And we've already seen some of the repercussions, as you say, in the abortion aspect of this, and the HHS mandate having to do with a contraceptive insurance care and forcing religious institutions to violate their own deeply held beliefs in order to comply with the regulations issued under this law. So this law basically takes over 1/6 of the nation's economy. And if the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, or the very limited powers under Article 1 of the Constitution, can allow that, then there's absolutely no power that the Congress cannot claim for itself. And that's the scary part for us.
Now, I don't want to go too far into speculation here, but as we look at this, on the one hand, it could be upheld and it stays in place. On the other hand, the court could say the whole thing goes down. I mean, those are the two extremes. But in between, there's a lot of room of what they could do. Can you just give us a sense of what that's like? Again, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but to give people an idea what could happen.
Yeah, when a constitutionality of one provision is challenged, and this is a multi-thousand-page law, and if the individual mandate is struck, the question is, what did Congress intend, what would happen if that one clause is struck? Right. Would Congress want the entire law to go because it's so integral as a funding mechanism for the Affordable Care Act, or would they only want that clause to go out and keep the rest of the law in place, or something in between? And those three positions are being argued as we speak at the Supreme Court today.
Yeah. So the court could leave most of it in place but take part of it out, but then it becomes, for example, if the individual mandate were to go, if you're going to have socialized medicine, let's posit that. If you're going to have a government-run healthcare system, one of the basic foundational points that has to happen is everybody has to pay in. Everybody has to be a part of it, at least those who pay taxes and who pay money into systems like that.
Right.
If you don't have that, you can't have the no pre-existing conditions, and you can't have a lot of other things because the whole thing crumbles quickly under its own weight.
It becomes very expensive to have an insurance system that doesn't involve everyone. And if people are allowed to stay out of the insurance buying market until they actually need health care, then the insurance costs for the rest of us will go up astronomically, and the whole law will collapse just because it's impractical.
It just all falls apart. I want to take a step away from what's happening at the Supreme Court during this week and take a look at this from the larger picture. One of the things we often talk about, especially during a presidential election, is you're not just voting for a president, you're voting for a person who will have the opportunity to place people for a lifetime on the Supreme Court until they either die or retire. I mean, it's one of those two options once you're on there. There is no chance to vote them out or anything like that. When people voted for President Obama, they also voted for someone who would place, in this case, two people on the Supreme Court, who replaced two reliably liberal justices on the court, and he replaced them with two people who have a very similar view of the Constitution, who see it as a document that can be changed over time by the court system. How do you see that playing into this case this week?
Well, the two new justices are liberal, and they're liberal in their constitutional view of how our founding document should be interpreted. If they believe it's a living document that can be expanded as we quote unquote need it to, they will have no problem with allowing this massive expansion of federal power into the insurance industry. And so that's the net result of electing a president who can appoint Supreme Court justices.
Do you see this coming down to a 5-4, that even split that we see so often in the social issues?
Yes, it very well could be on the mandate, and then on some of the other issues, it will fall out perhaps differently.
All right. When can we see a decision in this?
I would expect by the end of June. That's when the term is up for this session of the Supreme Court, and since this is being argued so late, I expect the decision will be one of the last ones, if not the last one, that the court issues before it recesses for the summer.
Anything else you want to share to sum it up before I let you go?
Well, again, this is all about the constitutional limits of Congress. How far can they go in regulating our everyday lives? Is there an individual liberty at interest here that Congress can't touch, or do they have carte blanche to legislate anything they want?
All right. Well, Bruce, thank you for following this for us, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you again to hear more about how the arguments went and how this whole thing played out as we go along. We always appreciate hearing from you. You may always write to us at mail@citizenlink.com. Remember, as you see those photos this week of the 9 Supreme Court justices, remember to pray for them, find out what their names are, pray for them by name if you would like. Pray for each one to have clarity and wisdom as they decide on this very important set of challenges that's before them right now. And remember, stand tall and be heard.